following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl, Hentz, and Dan Rylance here. You can't see him, but he is here. You'll see him in a minute. And we're very pleased to welcome back to the show an old friend. She was on many times when she was on the Oshkosh Common Council. She's been on a couple of times since she's been either running for or in the Senate. And she's running for re-election right now. Jessica King is here. She is running for the state senatorial seat in the 18th Senate District. And the election is on Tuesday, November 6th. And so you're here to talk about your candidacy and why you want to be reelected. So welcome.
Welcome,
Thank
Jessica.
you. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So the first thing is, why are you seeking reelection?
Well, because it's really, just having this year to get started and to get my feet on the ground. It's been kind of an incredible journey for me, but I really do believe in public service. I think we need to have independent thinkers in Madison, people who really want to get the job done. And what I've done is really taken my work history, my work ethic that I developed on the city council, and really brought it with me to Madison to say, I represent 160,000 people, and when's the last time you remember that many people agreeing on something? And of course, it's probably never, right? But the idea is
There's only three of us here.
Right, and we don't agree, right? But if we can find those commonalities and say, 7 out of 10, if you agree with me that much, we're doing probably a good job. And those other 3 times, if I do what every 4th or 5th grade math teacher does and show my work, explain myself, which is what I have a demonstrated track record on the city council of having done before I got to the Senate, that people at least respect me. And so I've been able to take that work ethic with me. It's been very successful, and I want to keep doing that because these decisions affect our homes.
Okay, go ahead.
It seems to me the big picture, Jessica, is that your Senate seat is probably the most important race for both parties in November. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think every race is critical, but I
No,
believe this
but
one will have attention.
This
yes.
is control of the Senate, one of the few races in the state. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So it's going to cost a lot of money for both you and for your opponent. So my question is, who's paying for your campaign?
Well, I tell you, it's average people. When we go out and do our fundraising, people know who's paying. You can look up my campaign finance reports. I'd say, I'm not sure what my average contribution is right now, but I would say it's a relatively nominal amount, and we do the best we can.
You're not going to. What's your budget? Do you have a budget for your campaign?
Well, right now, I'd probably say we have about $100,000 to spend, and quite a bit of that will be on maybe direct mail and trying to do canvassing and contact directly with voters to get out.
So you don't think the state party putting another 100,000, some outside interest putting in more? This is going to be a race that's going to cost you 300,000 or 400,000 to win, isn't it?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you can look at the past elections to see how much money has been spent. I'm not going to say money isn't spent in elections. I think it's a harsh reality. It's one of the reasons why I support campaign finance reform, because let's face it, I would much rather be doing my job than being out raising money,
Sure.
right? And just an example, which will be last week by the time this airs on television. But right now, I have that obligation to serve in my legislative capacity. So we'll be convening committee hearings, and I'm the chair of the Job Training, Technical College, and Workforce Development Committee. And Riverside campus, there'll be a hearing. So I'm still doing my job as a legislature. I'm not just, hey, it's time to campaign, so I'm not working. But so I think campaign finance reform would be beneficial because it would really even the playing field for people, and it allows me to focus on the things that I should be doing, which is working for people.
It's not going to happen. Every candidate's for campaign finance. We've been listening to campaign finance reform since I came here 14 years ago. Who's going to vote for campaign finance reform and get it passed?
Well, I'll tell you something. I think it was an error when the Democrats did have control of the both chambers and the governorship to not do it. And I think we've really learned. And I think now that the Supreme Court has passed Citizens United, allowing corporate money to be equal to speech and allowing unlimited spending, I think what's happening now is I almost think people are suffering from post-traumatic stress in the sense that they are done with being bombarded by the money, and they are done being bombarded by the speech, meaning all of this, soundbite communication that is impossible to fact check. I really think there can be that movement to really push it now because people have been exposed for so long to that, and that's one of the reasons too why I try to get out in front of the actual constituents as much as possible, because I know that people are getting very cynical about ads and about commercials and about robocalls.
Do you really think the Republican Party in Wisconsin will support campaign finance reform?
Well, I know I support it.
But they have the power.
Right now they do, and
Well,
so then it's up for.
They're going to have it for at least another 2 years, right?
Well, it's up for citizens to really start, continuing to do those.
I
movements.
understand, but I mean, they're not a party of campaign finance reform.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
Well, and something else that I don't know if anyone would vote for, citizens, if you talk to them, and I'm sure you have, people are fed up with these robocalls, at all hours of the day and night that calls like that can be made, to people's homes.
Right.
I finally got call blocking on my phone because I thought I am not going to continue getting these calls. Some, every once in a while, still sneak through, but, it would be nice if these political ads could be included in the do not call list, but what politician on either side of the aisle would vote for that? Because that limits their ability to reach out to people.
Well, this last session, there was a piece of legislation circulated. It didn't have any hearings or anything like that, and I'm very much open-minded to looking into that. I didn't sign on to it because I had some questions about polling versus electronic robocalls, because to me there is still a difference, and I don't know how they defined political that way, where I too agree that the robocalls, the electronic pre-recorded messages, are just really annoying, and people don't want to be invaded in their home space, and they should be able to opt out of that. I still wonder though about polling or canvassing and how that may be different if it's a live person conducting a poll. So that was my hesitation with it, but I'm open to considering it because as I talk to people, you feel that frustration, and I want to be taken as a legitimate candidate and stand behind my method of the communication I have, and I don't think robocalls are very genuine anyway. I don't think they're effective anymore.
Well, and then you've got another piece to that, and it's the automated calls. Like, I've gotten them from Ron Johnson. I think I've probably gotten maybe 3 or 4 since he's been in office. It's an update. He's not polling necessarily, but he's giving people an update. But I don't want to hear it on the phone. I don't want to sit there and listen to it on the phone. If I want to know what he's doing, I'll look at his website. I'll pull out PolitiFact or whatever, or I'll read about it in the paper or some other mainstream media or blogs or what have you. I don't want him in a recorded message taking up my time on the phone.
Right, and I think that's where this issue is. And I think over the years, people latch on to what's the newest thing. What's the new gadget or the new way to attract people. Whether it's social media or robocalling or what have you. And part of me thinks that, how many years ago that was cutting edge, and now the problem is there's so much volume and everybody's doing it that it's become overwhelming. So for me, I don't think it's effective as a candidate. It's not something I want to spend money on. I don't think it's a effective tool because I think it just irritates people. And so I've been really public about my opinion on that, and we'll see. But I agree trying to build that majority to get it passed through 2 legislative chambers is difficult. But I'm definitely open to it, and it was one of the things, that I've talked about before.
Okay.
Can you identify 2 or 3 issues that you differ from your opponent on?
To be fair, I haven't seen a lot of Rick Goodix's platform.
Okay.
I think, what I've really done is, I want to focus on workforce development, on job training, on the skills gap. That's my #1 issue on venture capital. The one thing I know for sure that has been very pronounced is our different stance on what happened with the mining legislation.
That's a good one.
There was a lot of conversation about what has happened in the last year. And what I think is it's just another great example of what's wrong with Madison, because I know there was some commercials earlier this year saying, Jessica King's against the mining bill and she's against jobs. And, that's not really true in a sense, because I actually co-sponsored with a bipartisan bill with Republican Senator Dale Schultz, on the permitting issue, because originally when the legislation came up, mining companies were saying, we need to evaluate the permitting process, and then there was this bill written by a corporation in secrecy, which is the Assembly Bill, where it was a bill that was over 100 pages long that was really changing mining policy, environmental policy, and that was something that was really expensive for the taxpayers. I don't think people understood the difference, right? So there was more than one bill. And what I found disingenuous is that there was this bipartisan bill in the Senate that had the support of both Republicans and Democrats and was never voted on because they didn't want to give Democrats a victory, right? And so that was kind of unfortunate, where we could have found a way to pass a bill that had all of the stakeholders actually having input instead of just the corporation. And it would allow for responsible permitting, and yet respect for conservation, respect for our drinking water, and respect for local communities that would obviously hold the financial burden for the devastation of the roads and for filling in of trout streams and potentially losing these other economic industries, where it's a trade-off. So I know that's one where he says, no, I support the Assembly version. I support the version of the bill that was drafted by the corporation. And that to me is a big difference.
You voted against the Assembly bill that
I did.
Went to the Senate, and your vote, and Schultz voted with you, so it was defeated by 1 vote. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's
so
right.
It's dead for the last session.
Right. And so, I think that says something when, even the Republican caucus didn't agree on that bill. But my opponent's been very adamant that he would support it. And I'm not. So, but that's the only one that I know for sure that this is we've taken a public position on it.
I'm going to introduce you to the second one because I know you want to talk about it, and that is his stand on Governor Walker not enforcing Obamacare, because he is adamant that.
Oh.
So could you walk us through that a little bit?
Certainly.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
okay. Right now, the Affordable Care Act is very much in the media. The Supreme Court has made a ruling on it saying that it will stand. There's pieces of the Affordable Care Act that have already been implemented, meaning, pre-existing condition, whether or not you're a young person under the age of 26, are you covered under your parents' health care? But the piece right now that we're really stymied about has to do with the healthcare exchange creation system, which was basically, I look at it as if you buy your airline tickets online, right, you have Expedia or you have Priceline or you have Orbitz, you have these electronic databases that allow you as the customer to compare price and quality and the things that you need in a healthcare policy. That's really what the healthcare exchange is. And I think a lot of people don't understand even what a healthcare exchange is, right?
I'm not either, but this is what Walker doesn't want to do.
Right.
Okay.
He is putting a blockade in and saying we will not even develop the formula for how we are going to put this database together to compare price and quality and what we want insurance companies to provide as a basic level of coverage. How are we going to organize that? And what I find horrible about this is that it's limiting us as a state to develop our own plan and what is important for our citizens. And the point is each of the 50 states has a very different population, has very different priorities, has very different thoughts about coverage. Wisconsin right now is the #2 state in the country for access to health care. Believe it or not, we have made that a priority. And now it's saying, why should we hold ourselves back from developing our exchange system and developing that template, because then we get to pick Wisconsin solutions for how we want to design and organize that. And And the fallback, if we don't take this time to actually develop our system and what's important for us, we'll end up with the federal model, right? So then that means we're going to have the alternative is the federal government telling us what to do, which I think is inherently rubs people the wrong way. People normally, especially of the more conservative persuasion, say, I want to do it my way. I don't want the federal government telling me what to do. And unfortunately, that's going to be the consequence of us not developing the framework for our own system with these exchanges. And that to me, that doesn't make any sense. And we've even returned money to the federal government that was supposed to be utilized for the basic fundamental development of this database. And so that means as taxpayers, we already paid our federal money for that, and now we're going to have to double down and pay more out of our as state taxpayers in the long run.
How much money did Walker send back?
You know, I'm not sure of the specific number, and I could get that to you, Cheryl. I'm sorry.
That would be good information, I think, to have.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, because when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, essentially Walker is once again deciding what laws are good for us and what laws aren't good for us and what laws he's going to enforce and what laws he isn't. And I don't know, I wonder how he would feel if someone said, you know what, Act 10 is a bunch of BS and we're simply not going to make our employees be held up to this standard. We don't agree with it, and it may be the law, but nah,
well,
we're not going to do it. And he would be up in arms over that. But yet something comes down from the federal government that he disagrees with, and he thinks that he can just not implement or enforce this law.
Well, and what I'll tell you the consequence of this really is, we have the Fox Valley Health Care Workforce Alliance here that is a cooperation, ministry, Aurora, our academic institutions that are all in the healthcare industry. They try to work together for the benefit of all of them. I call it cooperation. I use the wave robotics term and say, here we have this industry where a lot of the partners in it do compete with each other, but at some point they know they need to cooperate to survive. Some things really are in their best interest. And what we heard at a recent forum with that alliance was that this is creating such an amount of uncertainty because the margins in healthcare for whether it's ministry or Aurora or for these academic institutions are so tight that they need to understand what the business model is going to be. So this delay is actually hurting the private sector because they can't plan for something that they don't know. Right? And we haven't even begun the conversations. They're refusing. They're being obstructionist. And doing that hurts the private sector, so that means they won't be able to react timely for when the federal mandate comes because that's what we're leaving them to. And that's going to hurt us, this delay, this inaction. And then fundamentally, people elect public servants to do the work, right? If this is your job, you have to do the work. And I'll be the first one to say, how many city council meetings or how many times have I prepared for something that didn't happen, right? We investigated it, we went through it, we got our models, we came back to council, we'd vote on it, and we'd vote it down. Well, that's what happens, but you can't just say, I'm not going to do my job. I mean, I think that's a referendum of disservice. Okay, we're not doing it. Well, what does that mean? And goes around, comes around, too. I mean, we are a partner. I mean, we are federal taxpayers and we are state taxpayers. And the last thing I want to see is our money that we as Wisconsin citizens pay into the federal government go to another state to benefit them rather than coming to us, and then we have to compete with that other state. It doesn't, fundamentally I have a problem with that. Because it's not like we give it back and we can say, oh, please apply this to debt service. That's not what happens when we give back that money.
So there is a federal plan, if you will, in place, or that will be put in place if states don't enforce what has already been implemented.
Right, there will be a model. There will be a default model on how they set up the exchange and what the parameters are. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. I mean, there are some states, and I believe Utah is one, that has a very stripped down basic model where they've kind of been working on it. But and so that's what I mean. No law is perfect. I'm not going to say the Affordable Care Act is perfect. I'm not going to say we've got all the answers. But the point is, our job is to do our best efforts to get involved and to say, well, okay, let's make some lemonade. Maybe we don't like it. Maybe we think it's lemons, but we got to do the best with what we've got.
Okay.
Or else someone will tell us how to do it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I was originally thinking, you know what, if he's not going to see that this is enforced, then maybe the federal government should start taking away some things like federal monies for roadways or whatever to get states like this one to comply. But I'm glad to hear that there's, you know, a default or a fallback in place. You want to talk about the recall or you want to talk about voter ID?
I want to do the lightning round, and I have both of them in there. If
All
I could
right,
proceed.
let's go.
Lightning round, Jessica, is you can only answer yes or no, or you can pass.
Okay.
Okay. The number one question in the lightning round is, should the recall provision remain in the state constitution?
Yes.
Okay. Will the voter ID bill be revisited, and would you support it?
The current version, I'm confused about the question.
Current version, yeah.
I support parts of it.
Okay, yes or no, or pass?
Pass.
Okay. Will you support increased funding for K through 12 education in the UW system?
Yes.
Okay. Would you support reestablishment of funding for Planned Parenthood?
Yes.
Okay. Should Act 10 be amended to include rather than exclude police and fire employees?
No.
Okay. You want to keep them out?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Last one. Would you support a constitutional amendment to allow citizens of Wisconsin to amend the Constitution by a petition process?
No.
Okay. I'm done.
Can we expand
Absolutely.
on some of the, okay.
Yeah, we got to ask her about
All
the
right,
police
yeah,
and fire one.
Police
Right? Go
and
ahead.
fire, because as a result of them being excluded, we now have to, as a city, come up with more than $1 million that, you know, had they been included, we probably wouldn't have had to. So, you know, can you kind of expound on your answer a little bit?
Well, you know, I'm hoping that comes through the negotiation process. I have a lot of respect for employees that are in the protected classes. I have a lot of respect for all public employees in general. You know, I'm still to the point where this last year I've been doing quite a bit of work with the correctional institutions. I have 6 of them in my district, talking about workplace safety conditions, right? And we've had in some of the institutions in my district a record number of assaults in the last 2 years, to the point where security and non-security personnel at those corrections institutions, maybe they should be considered protected class employees, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why the police and fire folks were pulled out, because of the kind of dangers associated with their job and how difficult it will be to recruit those people. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't be bargained. I mean, and that's the point, is, you know, they still have to go through the bargaining process, the municipalities do, and we'll see what comes out of that process. But we need to keep places at the table to talk about workforce safety conditions, and I think that's the number one unknown issue in the last year and a half, of how in some of these institutions, especially up at King Veterans Home with the one-on-one care and the amount of forced overtime that's been happening, and how that creates unsafe workplace, to say you have someone who's working a 16-hour shift, a forced 16-hour shift, and then the next day they work an 8, and then the next day they are forced to work another 16-hour shift, and what kind of mental errors when that continues and continues and continues because of vacancies. What does that do? So I have actually been thinking about expanding, you know, some protective class for security corrections officers, because I think their job is just that dangerous. They're part of our law enforcement, and they're going to work in a 24/7 environment where they are dealing with our most tough customers.
Would that be just the prisons in your particular district, or are you talking jails as well? Because I think those correctional officers and their supervisors face the same kinds of things.
I agree. And that's what makes this complicated, right? But I fundamentally want to go to bat for the protected class, those protected class people, because they are in our public safety function. And you know, when I heard, for example, that in Pennsylvania, they put all their protected employees down to minimum wage for a while. And thinking about that, you know, we're asking these brave men and women, these people, to put up with these very dangerous work conditions, and I think that they should still be able to sit at the table and bargain.
If I reverse the question and asked you, would you vote to restore collective bargaining rights for all the public employees who were lost it in Act 10, what would your answer be?
I would support it.
Okay, so that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So but I like your answer on the other one. I want to hit just a minute on the constitutional amendment. I think the legislature in Wisconsin has way too much power. And the only people who can amend our Constitution are the legislators. And the Tea Party people and other people want more power to the people. Don't you think the citizens have a right to amend their own constitution?
Well, I think I'm very careful about the Constitution as a fundamental document, and I think it should not be a document where we throw the flavor of the month in there, right?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, the gay marriage, the same-sex thing went in there.
Well, I know, and I would tell you I'm not a fan of that either.
Yeah.
I think our constitutions are a fundamental document. They're supposed to be very basic. They're supposed to be very simple. They're supposed to outline our very. I think we should do more legislation rather than creating constitutional amendments. So I think it has more to do with my thoughts as a lawyer, or I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not going to say that. I'm an expert on all the potential ways you could develop a system to amend the Constitution, but fundamentally I believe it should be a simple document.
The only campaign finance bill that will really work is an amendment to the Constitution that would set term limits on all you people in Madison.
Well, that's something we should explore. I am not going to say I'm
But the
for them or
legislature's
against
never
them.
going to vote for a term limit on themselves.
Well, you know what the other fundamental thing is. I know people have been talking about the move to amend, or the how are we going to deal with Citizens United and all the money that's involved in campaigning. And some of the ideas that I've been really interested in is about, in order for a corporation to make a political contribution, that they have to get shareholder approval. And I think that kind of transparency effort may find more success with people, and it doesn't require an amendment. It's just passing legislation to say what if this is really corporate speech, then that means the shareholders, corporations are beholden to their shareholders. And if this is really their speech, well, then they should have shareholder approval of their speech. And I think that's a very creative idea that we should be thinking about in the future, because I think as shareholders of corporations, whether it's a publicly traded one or whether it's a small, locally held one, that you really should have to prove that this is in fact speech supported by your shareholders. And I think that would provide a lot of transparency, and it's a good idea.
Real quickly, because we're running out of time here, but voter ID.
It goes so quick.
I know it does. The voter ID bill. There's been a lot of talk about that. I think in its present form, it's kind of preposterous. And we've all heard the arguments. Oh, well, if you have to show an ID to get on a plane, you should have to show an ID to go and vote. I'm not opposed to showing an ID, but it's the way this particular law is written and will probably eventually be enforced if this isn't changed in some manner. It really does disenfranchise a fair amount of voters. Do you see this as something that's going to be revisited?
Well, I hope so. I think there's a lot of provisions in the voter ID bill that people don't know about. And one thing that I was particularly frustrated with is they took special registration deputies out of the high school, meaning that when someone turns 18, if they were still in high school, they would have a special registration deputy at their school that would help them register. And especially for rural kids who, they're municipal clerks, a volunteer clerk, they're not really open, they're usually only open when the kids are in school, then suddenly they're like, hey, where do I register? And that's part of our civic education, and suddenly we're denying that to people. I think there's a lot of elderly folks, people who are already maybe kind of shut in, that are facing a lot of difficulties in accessing the poll. Yeah. And I've been one of those people that if you've been voting in the same place for 20 years or 10 years and everybody knows who you are, I really feel bad for our senior citizens that are suddenly being denied that right to vote. And I think they're very intimidated. Even some folks that have disabilities, signing the poll book. Some people, that's intimidating for them because they don't have good use of their hands or their penmanship, and they have to do that publicly. But on the flip of it, I'll tell you, my office did a legislative poll through the district about the signing the poll registry, and it turned out that there was actually public support for that in the district, that the district thought that was a good thing to do. So I'm like, okay. And I think that's one of those things where, part of my job too is to support the district, and I was happy to learn that, so I keep that in mind as we go forward.
Okay, excellent. Well, we are out of time.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Jeez.
I know.
Well,
it's
Well, we
flies.
gave her a lot of questions,
Yeah,
and she
we
did
did.
very well in
So,
responding.
yep.
So,
So thanks very much,
Yeah.
and good luck on November 6th. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, Gordon Hintz will be here to talk about his campaign. We'll be right back.
Every year, the U.S. Department of the Treasury receives about 1.4 million reports of problems with paper checks. Checks can be lost, stolen, or delayed. If you still receive Social Security payments by paper check, Treasury wants you to know about a safer, more convenient way to get your money. The Direct Express Prepaid Debit MasterCard. The Direct Express card is new and is available to anyone receiving Social Security benefits, even if you don't have a bank account. Your monthly benefits will be automatically placed onto your card account each month on the day your money is due. While other debit cards cost money, it is possible to use the Direct Express card for free to make purchases, pay bills, and get cash at thousands of locations nationwide. There are no sign-up or monthly account fees. No more waiting for the mail or worrying about lost or stolen checks. Call 1-877-212-9991 or visit www.usdirectexpress.com.
Hello and welcome back to Eye on Oshkosh, and very pleased to be joined now by our current assemblyman or state legislator in the 54th Assembly District. Gordon Hintz is here. Welcome.
welcome,
Thanks for
Gordon.
having me. Good to be
We
here.
appreciate you being here, especially with a cold. So many people are sick right now, so just try to keep it on that side of the table.
I think I'm on the mend, but there's
There
no
you go.
no rest
There
for
you
the
go.
weary in campaign
That's
season.
right. Well, you're seeking, what is this now, your third term?
This will be my fourth term.
Fourth term,
Oh,
okay.
Wow.
And so why are you running again?
Well, because I'm still motivated by my original desire. I still believe that government's got a positive role to play. I still get up every day wanting to be an advocate for my community and serve the people of Oshkosh. I asked myself, this isn't something you do for the sake of doing it. If you better get up, if you get invited to go do something, you better stop and talk to someone if they have a question. You better call someone back if they ask you to. And I still want to do those things. I'll also say, obviously, the last 2 years have been divisive, tough for the state of Wisconsin. And, given kind of where I'm at in my career, I think it's important not to run away from the cynicism and, everything that's gone on, and hopefully, be a part of sort of stabilizing things and some balance in there. And, I haven't been perfect. I've made some mistakes, and I've been trying to, talk to my colleagues on the other side more and figure out how we can maybe argue about the future, not about the last few years.
Okay, excellent.
I want to talk about money for a minute. Everyone talks about campaign financing and stuff. Who's running your campaign, and how much money is coming locally versus somewhere else?
I've always been, if I wasn't in office, I'd probably be running someone's campaign, which is a very dangerous mix because you have a hard time delegating. So I'm running my campaign. I've got a senior at UW Oshkosh who is working for me full time, and she's doing a lot of my work, and I try to tell her to tell me where to go.
Okay. How much do you have a budget?
You do a small, medium, and large. I think we'll probably, at the end of the day, kind of figure out where we are, but probably somewhere between 35 and 50,000.
Okay. Would you agree that the state party is less interested in supporting your campaign than they would be Jessica King, who's in a race which might determine the Senate?
Sure. I think this Senate race, because of the makeup of what it is, because the one seat difference,
Right.
because it was a seat that was won in a recall, because this area has long been represented by Republicans,
Right.
sure, it's a
Yeah.
target, and that's going to get a lot of attention. Well, I think we're going to pick up seats and hold some of these Republicans accountable in the Assembly. We don't have a chance. You know, it'd be hard for
It'd
us
be
to
very
take
hard.
back the majority.
Yeah.
You know, and I've also kind of said, look, I want them to focus on other seats. You know, I sort of have a, you know, I got to spend time working hard to get reelected. This isn't a big Republican or Democratic area. So instead of, you know, well, I won't be able to help out other people, you don't have to help me out. I mean, I kind of feel like I can want to do this myself.
Yeah. The last two opponents, Jonathan Kraus last time and Paul Essling this time, really aren't Republicans in the sense that they have come up through the local Republican Party and got the nomination. They both got it because no one challenged them. Do you think that might suggest that the regular Republicans in the 54th District aren't really displeased with what you're doing?
You know, I'd like to think so. I mean, I'll say this. I have
Yeah.
a good relationship with a lot of Republicans. I was at the Senior Center on Sunday for their Fall Fest and see some of the people that often give me a hard time, but they do so in a good way. And you know what? It's important. I mean, because it's a grounding force for, you know, where your district is. And I always remind people, and it's not just a cheesy line, you know, I have people that when I knock on their door tell me to get out, I say, well, you know, let me know if you need anything.
Sure.
You know, it's not that you don't represent them. I think we haven't made public service that inviting. You know, we have a hard time getting Democratic candidates in areas just because you think I want to go through that, you know. And I think that's one of the things that I think is really suffered is public service, whether it's serving in, you know, running for elected office or just working in the public sector. I think that's been one of the worst thing that's occurred with this whole fight and in the down economy is sort of the, you know, undermining about, you know, that public service can be a distinguished and noble career for people that choose to work in any capacity.
I want to interrupt
Oh,
for
please
just
do.
a second.
Yeah.
Because I just happened to glance up at the monitor, and Gordon, I'm sorry, your name is spelt wrong.
Oh, no.
Both your first and last name. So if we can just have the crew correct that, we'll just continue talking while they make that correction. So
Okay.
sorry about that.
You know, that's okay. Maybe they thought it was a different Gordon Hintz running. It's 2 point. This is the
Well,
2012.
no, it was typed as Groden Hintsy, or I don't know. But
It's
anyway,
kind of,
we'll,
I like the first.
Groton
I like
Hertz.
the first name. That-
we're very sorry, and we'll get it corrected.
Yeah,
So anyway, go on. I'm
That's-
sorry.
Okay. Back to. Can you identify like 2 or 3 issues that separate you from your opponent?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I can, and you know, values.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, you know, I live in, and this is both, I think, you know, one of the reasons why I think it's important to send people back that are going to live in the real world and govern from a place that doesn't start with, you know, up here. I feel, you know, all the answers that seem to come out of my colleagues in the legislature and my opponent in this race, you know, they've already decided ahead of time that, you know, government's the problem, that we need to, you know, just cut spending, and you know, that doesn't tell us how we're going to increase the number of college graduates, how we're going to fund public education, how we're going to compete with the rest of the world, how we're going to deal with the fact that if you're born poor in Wisconsin or in the United States, you're more likely to stay poor than at any place in the Western world. I mean, opportunity is really under attack, and I'm someone who is going to govern from a place where we know we have a lot of challenges, where the economy's wreaked havoc on and social problems, you know, on families. And so, you know, I'm someone who hasn't made up my mind before I've even started. And so that would be a big value difference between us. You know,
Yeah, that's a huge one.
absolutely.
I mean, that covers almost all the issues. I mean, a lot of issues, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, when you draw distinctions, again, we could pick issues here that we disagree with, and those things will happen. But I think when you're running a campaign and you're choosing, you know, it's who's going to take the right approach and what kind of values are going to be most important to them when they go into, you know, serving the public. And, you know, you got to take into consideration, you know, the views of your district, but also what's going to be in the best interest of the state long term. And I think if one of the things I'd say about the last 2 years is, you know, there seems to be this sort of decisions to govern in a world that they wish it was rather than the world it actually is.
What would you like to do within the reality that you're probably going to be in a minority in the Assembly. What are major goals for you if you get reelected in November?
Well, first off, I hope everybody that served in this last term and can decide that we're going to come back and serve the people of Wisconsin and really get back to what our job is, and hopefully not have as a divisive agenda. We're going to have disagreements on the best ways to do things. We know we left some bills on the table related to venture capital and helping entrepreneurial startups, and certainly the mining bill is going to come back. But also just, let's have a real check and balance system. We don't have to agree, but we had 27 new Republicans in the Assembly last year. Just almost a third of the body was brand new. We had worked hard in my first term when I was in the minority. We were treated pretty well. After the John Gard era, both sides got together and said, you know what, let's work on the process, the rules for how to engage, how long debate will last, how we'll treat each other. And those were upheld in my first 2 terms. They were thrown out the window. Things were rammed through. We had votes with 28 members not even in the room. They weren't allowed to cast their votes. We had every Republican member, I think, signed a secrecy oath on redistricting. We just got so far away from the transparency that Wisconsin's known for. The things that we had established in place to allow for the minority to have a legitimate say and voice in things. And I also think it'd be better politics. I had breakfast with the governor. They invited us there about a month ago, and sat with him for 90 minutes at the executive residence, and we talked, some of it was small talk, but I brought up the mining bill, and I said, no one even came to visit our office. No one even tried to answer my questions. No one tried to say, here's a good reason, here are some things about it, because they weren't interested. They had 60 votes and a pedal to the floor, and I think that was not a smart move. I had questions, I had concerns, but I also would have appreciated, some of the proponents taking the time to come through. And I said to the governor, to the extent that you have a say in that, bring us in. We may not be able to agree at the end of the day, but talk about a one-sided, hey, let's see what we can get passed. If we'd done something like Minnesota or Michigan have, and they've got iron ore mining, we would have had a bill today.
Another area in which you disagree with your opponent, and you disagree with Governor Walker as well, is, he has said that he is not going to enforce the aspects of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that are already implemented. It's the law now, those things, and the Supreme Court has upheld some major provisions of it. And so, in essence, I see that as saying, okay, the governor can break the law, and we've got your opponent and a lot of Republicans who say, yeah, go for it. What's your response to that?
It's crazy. Can we not make a single decision in this state anymore that doesn't have something to do with politics, that's not aimed at Wisconsin being a swing state and trying to, say this whole thing? Every part of Obamacare that's in right now, eliminating pre-existing conditions, allowing young adults to be on their parents' health insurance, reimbursing seniors on Medicare for any money that's spent above the 85% that needs to be spent on health care. These are all positives. Now, we know the mechanics of how to fund it are going to be challenging going forward, but what an opportunist. Are you really trying to govern the state of Wisconsin, both from a financial standpoint and from a meeting, what are you trying to do by doing this? It's purely a political thing, and I want a governor who's an executive, who's going to be, a real person in the real world addressing what this bill was aimed at. And there's a lot of good things in there from Wisconsin. He's doing a disservice to the overall discussion by healthcare, and he's being negligent. Again, at the end of it, my guess is they're working on it, because if, the president wins, we're not going to have the federal government decide for us what we're going to do. I think they're going to have time to come up with something. So,
well, and Jessica King, who was on just before you, she said that Walker has already sent back money that was intended to and provided to the state to set up this healthcare exchange. So in essence, the way she explained it is he not only sent the money back, so kind of flushed that down the toilet, but we're going to have to spend money to do it anyway.
Right.
So it's costing us double.
And
is that in fact a fact?
It is fact, and it's hard when it's nice to not have be in Madison for a while, but sometimes the more you're knocking on doors, I can tell you more about people's yards, landscaping, and dogs than when the federal money was returned. But when between the healthcare money, Medicaid money, the high-speed rail. We are seeing a lot of our tax dollars going to other states instead of Wisconsin for things that we're ultimately going to pay for.
She did not know, but do you happen to know how much money he returned?
I don't. Two digits. There was money that was supposed to be available to states for the implementation of the healthcare exchange system. The interesting thing, and I wish they would speak out more, but I believe the Senate passed the exchanges thing, in the Assembly we didn't. And then the governor took the lead and said he wasn't going to do anything anyway, or would have vetoed it. But the private health insurance companies, they wanted this. They'd rather be involved. We happen to have a really healthy private insurance market in Wisconsin, especially in the Madison area. And we have a lot of investors and other people around me that are definitely Republicans that said they think this is crazy. Let's just want to be involved in this if it's going to happen.
Jessica King mentioned that they're waiting for this.
Well,
because they want it.
Correct.
And the insurance company has, because they're so big and they are powerful, they certainly have some lobbyists who, why can't these lobbyists say something to Governor Walker and say, come on, let's get going
Because Governor
here.
Walker's not interested in actually addressing a policy or a problem or a challenge. And I think that's the realization, is that in this case, he is trying to purely win a political battle and trying to make a case that helps, support Mitt Romney, which has been, unfortunately, a lot of the worst decisions in the state have been purely political.
Okay, well, there we go. You want to do your lightning round?
You ready, Gordon? This is a lightning
All
round.
right, I'll try to keep,
The rules of lightning round is you may only give a yes or no or a pass answer.
Does pass mean that it's more complicated than a yes or no?
It can be whatever you want, just so you're not going to vote yes or no. I don't want you to explain your pass, just say pass. Okay, number one, should the recall provision remain in the state constitution?
Yes.
Okay. Should Paul Ryan be allowed to have his name on 2 statewide elections?
Yes.
Okay. Would you support increases funding for K through 12 education in the UW system?
Yes.
Okay. Should funding for Planned Parenthood be reinstated?
Yes.
Okay. What do you want to do with the police and fire employees? Do you want to put them into Act 10, or what do you want to do?
I don't want to put them into Act 10.
Okay. Okay. All right. We're going to come back to that. We had the same. It's not. I'm sorry. It wasn't very well worded. Would you support a constitutional amendment to allow citizens of Wisconsin to amend the Constitution by a petition process?
Pass. I haven't thought about it.
Okay. That's it. Now we'll go back. You hit them on the. Why don't you want to? What are you going to do with police and fire people?
This is
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, because I wasn't, I didn't support Act 10.
Okay.
I think, and I'm not here to, one of the things you try to think about when you're running is we really should be debating, what we're going to do about the future, and we're not going to go back to 1995 or even 2009. The fact is that it's happened. We've had these recalls. That being said, I would like to improve upon what we have. I mean, I think there's ways we could have reformed the mediation arbitration process without burning down the entire state.
Sure.
Insulting a generation, an entire vocation of teaching and public service. That being said, clearly we're going to hear from some of our municipalities.
Yeah.
The largest costs are public safety, and I take that seriously. And I think you are going to start having some real problems between you have all these municipal employees, and they have all these kind of different rules. And I think especially when you have transit, because we had to do them because we would have lost the federal funding. I would like to see us. Usually, if you pass bad policy, you take a look at what works. And what you can tweak. I would like to see more of the MED-ARB reform that we should have done in the first place. In other words, do some things with an arbitration process that may have failed, and give everybody some of their bargaining rights back. Now, that's probably not going to happen, obviously, so the question is, what kind of changes could you make to police and fire? And we'll see if these guys are really, if it was public policy, then they'll do police and fire, meaning the Republicans. If it's politics, which it was the first time, which was exempting them, you know, they won't. And so I think this will be a good test. I guess my job will be to protect the bargaining rights of those in public safety, but certainly be open to ways to modify MEDARB in a way that I think is, you know, fair and, you know, takes the adjustment for the economic transformation that we're having right now. So I realize that's complicated, but a lot of HR professionals will tell you the same thing. I feel like we're seeing a lot of the problems right now, especially in some of the you know, state institutions we have here, Winnebago, Oshkosh Correctional, related to a lack of you know, bargaining rights and representation. The idea that, well, we got to put everybody on even footing. You know, I think, well, why don't we look at, you know, some of the problems that exist, reinstating some of those bargaining rights and addressing some of the, you know, worst parts that were highlighted. We did not have a perfect system, and I'm aware of that. And you know, some of the high cost abuses and some of the changes needed for overtime and other things.
Sure.
You know, that you know, without kind of burning down the whole farm.
Constitutional thing, you said you hadn't thought about it, so I guess I won't pursue that. Some of the other states have a referral process for a passed bill by the legislature. Ohio did that. You know, in hindsight, if Wisconsin would have in their constitution a right of citizens to refer a bill passed by the legislature, Act 10 would have gone before the people, and it probably would have been voted down. We would have eliminated all this recall nonsense because they were really recalling people because of their vote on Act 10. Wouldn't that make a lot of sense to have a referral measure?
You know, I think you're absolutely right on that. Meaning, you know, I think you heard from a public that disagreed with many of the things that had happened and didn't like the process that it happened in and thought it was unfair. But that you also had people that had problems with what they felt was an undemocratic action of removing a democratically elected governor.
Right.
All of these things shouldn't be taken in a vacuum, meaning they should be looked at over time. I mean, when the recall statute was first put in, you know, it was about accountability. You know, what recourse does the public have if you have a governor that says one thing and then completely lies and does another thing, you know, that says he wants to divide and conquer the public and, you know, well, what we have in our Constitution is that you can recall that person.
Passed by Republicans, by the way.
And you know, and I think the question is, you know, what's the downside of the other? You know, I mean, sometimes you have to make decisions that are unpopular, but you may have a monopoly of all the information involved. I mean, I you know, given this last year, would that have been preferable in Ohio to what we have here? Probably.
Oh, I think it would have saved an enormous amount of time and money. And
right. And I think we are going to do, I'm not saying the recall process is perfect.
No.
You know, when you ask me the yes or no.
Yeah.
I think we're going to revisit a lot of these issues, hopefully without anger and without meanness and without fear. But, you know, just say, okay, let's look at functionally how these things worked and whether they're fair and appropriate.
Good answer, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you. One of the issues that I suspect will probably be revisited to some degree is the voter ID bill. You know, what do you want to see happen there? Do you feel, first of all, that we need some kind of ID at the polls?
No, because although I wouldn't have been opposed to it if we had done a comprehensive, I mean, look, I think election integrity is an incredibly important issue. You know, I don't know how anybody felt about the county clerk in Waukesha finding 7,000 votes on her personal computer that she forgot to report, or some of the pictures of ripped bags, or just some of the stories that come out of the polling experience. Talk to our clerks. We keep requiring, you know, more and more out of our clerks and not giving them the resources and not having uniformity among our counties. We have all different standards around the state. Those are the things I think we need to address for election integrity. Remember, a photo ID only stops voter impersonation.
That's right, and there are no violations on
We've
that.
had zero.
Zero.
So
Yep.
I think it's become pretty clear to most of the public that this was aimed at, you know, trying to deter people from voting and, you know, primarily people that don't vote the way of the sponsors of the bill.
Well, and the arguments that we heard prior to the recall elections are from the Republicans and those who supported the voter ID bill. Those arguments are toast now because they simply don't apply, because their candidates got reelected. So how much voter fraud can there really be? Because even though the law was passed, it wasn't being implemented because of, I don't want to go down that whole road, but they weren't required to enforce it at the polls. And so we went through 2 or 3 different elections, if you want to count in primaries, where we didn't have these things, and their people still got elected.
And and the horrible thing about all of this is, if you were to ask 20 people outside here what the law is right now, or whether you need one or not, it's confusing, and that's the worst thing you want. And it also undermines, because of the sensational headlines. I thought some of the accusations of what people thought occurred in Racine was disgusting and was unfair. Some of those people should apologize, because it plants the seeds, and even if it's a perception, that something occurred. But I've yet to see someone tell me that, we have a hard enough time getting people to vote. The idea that someone goes there and says they're somebody else,
Right.
so they could vote twice?
So would you support voter ID on any level?
I understand. Look, I've talked to enough good people out there that they feel it's a legitimate concern, whether they got their information from somebody, and I respect that. They want to show their ID. I think there could have been a compromise out there that would have, whether real or perceived, addressed people's fears. But let's look wholesale at what we do for elections in this state. Again, Outagamie County, the clerks there all have different systems within one county. We have uniformity in Winnebago County, but around the state we have all different systems. And it's 2012 for a country that promotes democracy around the world. We still aren't quite getting it right, and I think there are. We owe it to ourselves. And even if it costs a little money to maintain the integrity of our elections, and this is. Really a sideshow, and it's going the wrong way.
Okay.
Personal question, sort of. Are you prepared for personal attacks by your opponent in this election?
Sure. I mean, they don't have anything else to talk about. Unfortunately, if you know my opponent and you don't have anything else to say but no, I love Governor Walker and cut spending, you're going to go to the bottom of the barrel, and they've already shown that they're going to do that. I can't do anything about the past. I think my professional and personal miscues that are 100% mine are pretty well documented. But I would hope people would focus on the fact that, we're having an election about who is going to serve and address the issues. And I never stopped showing up for work, even when it wasn't easy.
I assume you will not engage in personal attacks against him?
No.
Okay.
I mean, there's too much material to work from.
Okay.
Well, you're right, because what is also well documented is his own situations on a personal level in bars and so forth. So,
I mean, if we want to, I said to someone, if we want to have a Jerry Springer show and probably turn everybody off, we could. Hey, look, I could talk about bar fights and fire trucks, and but to be honest with you, I think the council record shows for itself. You're talking about someone who voted against the blue recycling bins that have now saved millions of dollars that city taxpayer dollars would have had. There's plenty of issues that I'm happy to go after the record on.
Okay.
all right, speaking of issues, we're almost out of time, but what specific issues are you going to run on? Which ones are you most passionate about?
Well, again, to me, it's a broader, I feel like as a representative for this community, it's important to have someone that's been in there that can stand up for this community and stand up, to some of the things that have been coming down from the governor. I'm going to be an advocate for public schools. I don't want to see taxpayer-funded vouchers come to Oshkosh. I, want to work to get the political calls on the no-call list. I had a hearing when I was chair of the Consumer Protection Committee. I think that's something we can all agree on. And look, I want a good mining bill. I want a good venture capital bill. There are things that both sides want, and I want to play a positive role, but I want to be invited to the table whether I'm in the majority or minority.
All right, excellent. Well, very good. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks for having me, and hope everybody gets out and votes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good luck on November 6th. That's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.